So this morning we are here talking to Yamina Bibi. Yamina is an educator and an author. Yamina, do you want to just tell us a little bit more about you?
Yeah, I am a former deputy head teacher in London, in a secondary school, and yeah, as you said, I'm an author, and I'm currently working as a freelance consultant and a project specialist for the Chiltern Learning Trust and Chartered College of Teaching.
So can you tell us a little bit about why did you decide to pursue a career in education and teaching?
Yeah, it's my favourite thing to talk about. My parents were really determined that education was the gateway to all success. They didn't have a formal education back in Bangladesh, which is where they're from. And when they came here, they were determined that we would all become teachers because it was a really respected and revered career. So all my sisters are actually teachers. I'm the only secondary school teacher because that was my bit of rebellion, you see, Becky. But I found that education really is the gateway to success, and it can really elevate a young person's life, and it gives them kind of access to things and opportunities that they might not have had. So being able to be a teacher, to be able to support a young person, empower a young person, was really exciting for me. And so this is now 15 years on. I can't believe I've done it for so long, but that passion hasn't kind of gone away to change the lives of young people, particularly in kind of deprived and disadvantaged areas of London, because that's where I'm born and bred.
So are there any particular challenges that you faced along the way that you think have shaped your career and the way you think about education now?
Yeah, I mean, when I was younger, we grew up on the Isle of Dogs, which was the British National Party had just left. It was quite racially aggravated. There wasn't a lot of people that looked like me. There weren't many South Asian young people who looked like me. So I faced a lot of racism and Islamophobia when I was growing up. And not fault of any of my teachers, but I just didn't have a teacher that looked like me, who I felt safe enough to talk about kind of some of the incidents or issues that I was facing, like students in the school pulling my hijab off. I was one of the only hijabis in the year group or in the school, or like somebody spitting at me on the bus and nobody in the public or otherwise did anything about it, and saying things like, oh, you're a terrorist, go back, or you smell of curry. You know, those sorts of things really shaped, I think, the teacher that I've become, because for me, ultimately, I want to be a safe space for a young person, but also create that sense of belonging and a sense of representation that, you know, there is somebody that looks like them who's maybe experienced some of the things that they've also experienced, and support them and empower them to be able to succeed regardless of kind of the issues or challenges that they might face. And I think that's really determined the kind of teacher and leader actually I am and have been.
Yeah, wow. So you've taught in some really diverse secondary schools in London. So is there something that stands out the most about your time there?
Yeah, oh gosh. I always start and talk about the first school I went to teach in. So lots of people don't know, but I was born and brought up in Tower Hamlets. It's quite diverse. That 80% of the kind of people there are from Bangladeshi background, which is my background and my heritage. And I decided to go and teach outside of Tower Hamlets and go and teach in Lewisham, which is south of the river. And my family were like, don't do it. What are you doing? Stay in Tower Hamlets, stay in East London, essentially. And I said, no, I want to do something different. And I was the first person of colour or first South Asian hijabi teacher in the school. And it was 2010, and it was just post kind of 9/11, post kind of some of those fractions that we had in society and within even our system. And when I went, one of the first things a student said is, oh my God, here's a ninja who's going to blow us up. And I was just distraught because I hadn't faced that as much in Tower Hamlets where I grew up, because it was quite diverse. But I had two options. Either I leave and, you know, come back to what I know, or stay and try and change minds. And I decided, I don't know what possessed me, but something in me said, no, I want to stay and try and show them a different side, a different perspective, because that's all those young people knew.
Yeah.
That's all they ever knew. So, you know, I spent a lot of the 3 years that I was at that school in Lewisham, really showing them a different way that Muslim women or hijabi women weren't oppressed, we weren't shy for sure, and actually, you know, we were really educated and we were here to support the young people. And I think I could do that, and I did do that. And there's one particular moment that really stands out to me, and I'm an English teacher by trade, and I always forget to say that. It's the best part was teaching the books. And so I taught of mice and men, and instead of just focusing on mice and men, I'd found non-fiction kind of to parallel those sorts of stories of those enfranchised people in the books. And I remember talking about belonging. And I don't think it was a buzzword back then, but just the feeling sense of safety and belonging and the kind of way in which cooks must have felt, for example, in Of Mice and Men. And then thinking about how other people within society might feel, people from protected characteristics who perhaps were gay, who were Muslim, who were black, and really discussing that with my class. And I remember afterwards, one of my students actually said, you know, Miss, you've actually made me feel really safe enough for me to tell you that I'm gay, and you made me feel really safe. And I get really emotional thinking about that moment. And I think that's what great teachers can do, is you create a safe space enough where young people feel a sense of belonging and safety to be able to then share a part of their identity with you. And I think that always still stays with me. I get really emotional now, but really stays with me about the young person who I'm still in touch with after all these years. And it just shows the power of one teacher, perhaps, in changing that young person's life.
Yeah. That's amazing. So you've got to the point now where you've sort of stepped outside of the classroom for a little bit. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that move and what you're doing now?
Yeah, I think everyone thought I was a bit crazy. So I was a deputy head teacher and I led on like curriculum and personal development and behaviour. And then I decided that I did a bit of part-time work on the side while I was also teaching. And when the book came out, you know, people were really interested in the book and I kept getting asked to come kind of speak. And so I decided to make this kind of a full-time side hustle of going and working with schools, because I think there needs to be a change in the system, and it's really hard to change a system or disrupt a system if you're within the system and you're working 5 days a week. And so I found that really challenging, and I thought, actually, I would definitely come back to teaching. I know that for sure. I'm an aspiring head teacher, and so I'm very aware of that. But I think this is the time now to really go and see what different schools are doing. So working with Chiltern Learning Trust is really exciting, because I get to come and see what kind of effective practice looks like in other parts of the country, not just in London, not just in my school, but also disrupt the system a little bit. So some of the work that I'm doing with the Chartered College of Teaching, Chiltern Learning Trust, is a specific project where we're trying to increase the number of ethnic minority teachers in teaching, because the data from the NFER and Jack Worth's data show that there's an overrepresentation of ethnic minority teachers actually applying to teach, but underrepresentation of them being accepted. So we thought, instead of, and the project is about, instead of just working with, you know, ethnic minority teachers and saying you're the problem or there's a deficit in what you're doing, let's go and work with the skits or the teacher training providers who are actually not accepting these ethnic minority teachers. So that's the kind of work we're doing, and that's such an exciting project. And it feels very, very important. And that's quite disruptive, I think, in what we're doing, because a lot of the models that I know is working with ethnic minority teachers who are maybe aspiring leaders and doing the work with them. But I think there's a system change that needs to happen. And the work that I do with Women Ed, which is a charity organisation that works at kind of supporting aspiring female leaders particularly, or diverse educators, which I know Chiltern work with, it's kind of working in line with those kind of organisations and with the Chartered College to actually disrupt the system rather than just thinking about working within the system, which is really exciting and very rewarding already.
I can imagine, absolutely, yeah. So we're talking about your book, Thrive. What does it mean to you to thrive? Where does that idea come from?
Yeah, when I was thinking about this particular book, I spoke to my editor and she was saying there's a few options, and this particular one around for early career teachers and new teachers really stood out to me. One, because when I was an early career teacher in NQT, I really struggled. I was just surviving. I was always just surviving. I used to mark until like 1-2 o'clock in the morning. It was really challenging, and I just didn't know what else to do. And I think I found it really, really challenging to be in a school where it was already a struggle, it was a special measure school, but also then to thrive wasn't just an option. So when I was thinking about this book, I was thinking, what is it that new teachers need? We need to stop being so negative, I think, and just think, oh, it's just about surviving this first year. Think, how do we help you to really thrive? So in the book, I tried to provide these really practical strategies that essentially bring that idea to life. What does it look like to be a thriving early career teacher, to be a new teacher? And so that's how I kind of broke up the book as well, thinking about their career progression. And so that's literally the structure of the book. But for me, thriving is about having clarity and being consistent. And I think as an early career teacher, things are inconsistent and you're not always clear because it's so new to you. And with anything that you do when you're a novice, everything's always just like you're just trying to get through it. And I think that's why I chose this title for this book, because I don't want early career teachers to have this negative or deficit model, but actually to think, what can I do? How can I be the best of myself for the young people that I serve, essentially?
What was the writing process like for you? Did you find it hard to write at the same time as teaching?
Yes. All my friends will tell you. One of my best friends messaged me the other day. She was saying, in your book launch, you made it sound like this was a breeze, but I've got all the messages that say that you are struggling. And I did. I really struggled with the process of writing, not because it wasn't there, because I felt like I had it all in my head, but then having the discipline to sit down for an hour a week and really get it written down, I found really, really hard. And my dad passed away in the process, and so that kind of set it back. But I realized that one of the dedication in the book is to my parents. They both passed away, but they were the reason I started teaching, and they were the reason why I think I'm thriving now, is because of the kind of values that they brought and the kind of discipline that they brought. So it took me ages, and Hannah Wilson, who's my coach, also co-founder of Diverse Educators, just went, right, we're sitting down together, and we sat down in a weekend, and she helped me just kind of plan and structure when I was going to write what. So there's a sense of accountability. Yeah. And that's what I would say to anybody who's writing a book or thinks about writing something like this, is to have somebody who you can be accountable to, because I'm not very good at holding myself to account. I'll say, yeah, let me sit down and write, and I'll make it really fancy, like I'd got a really fancy contents page, and then for like 3 months wrote nothing. So having someone to be accountable to was really helpful for me as part of the writing process.
Yeah. So your parents definitely, do you think that your greatest influence when it comes to your career and your writing?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I said it earlier, but they were the people who kind of said teaching was the career that was going to be beneficial to society. It was about giving something back, but it was also giving these young people a gateway to their opportunities. And maybe we didn't have it when we were younger, but I definitely think that education was the reason why I've been able to do what I do, and why my family have done what they've been able to do. Well, most of us are teachers, and I think that they're amazing. My family are amazing, but definitely my parents, who had no formal education themselves, to then have children who are all teachers and educators, I think is so powerful, and talks about, is a testament to them as kind of influential leaders in my own life, but just influential in all of us, and how, it doesn't matter what your circumstances are and where you come from. It's about how you might use education to kind of help you and be a springboard for your success. So I've tried to really instill that within not just the book, but just within my own life and career as well.
Yeah. What do you think you learned most about yourself when you were writing Thrive?
Oh, that maybe that I really struggled as an early career teacher. I really struggled as an NQT, and I perhaps wish I had something like that book that I've now written. I wish I had that when I was starting out as a 22-year-old, at NQT. But so much of what I learned was from my mentors and from the people that I worked with, and I think there's so much of that that's perhaps a little bit lost now, because we're in these huge places and we don't have these kind of offices that we used to sit. I mean, I remember when I first started teaching, I'd go to the staff room and say, oh, that was a rubbish lesson. And an experienced teacher would say, oh, Yamina, have you tried this or have you tried that? And that's how I learned. And I think while I was writing, all of those memories and all those bits of wisdom came back. And I dedicate so much of the book to my coaches, but my mentor, Teresa Dunseith, who was my NQT mentor. All of those kind of things that she taught me just came back while I was writing the book, and I realized that I actually had learnt so much and had come so far in the last 15 years of teaching and leading. And I think that was really powerful, because it gave me confidence that I really struggled with imposter syndrome, and the whole way through I was like, what am I doing? Who's asked me to write a book? Who do I think I am? But I think while I was writing, I was gaining more and more confidence in that there's expertise in experience and wisdom in experience too. And so that was really powerful for me, I think.
Have you had any feedback from people who have read your book?
Yeah, it's been, I think one of the best things, I'm a people pleaser, so I love feedback, but it's been really great to see feedback from new teachers who found the book really helpful. I love watching, because there's lots of DIY, like do-it-yourself activities in the book. I love when they send me a picture of their little activities, actually completing the activities. It's one of my favourite things. Or like people like Pepsi McRae or Mary Meyer, I know they're quite a big deal, and that is a huge name drop, I know. But when they've given me feedback, and said, actually, it's really practical, it's super helpful.
Wow.
Peps was saying when, when he was leading skits and things like that, teacher training, he wished he'd had something like that to give his trainees. That is an honour. And I think that's what I'm loving. I love seeing the photos of people gifting a copy of my book, and then people reading it and saying, yeah, that's actually really helpful. And I mean, I was at the CS2, the community schools dinner Friday, and the CEO was saying, I'm really surprised that it's actually really helpful. I was like, thanks, Simon. No, that's his banter. But I love that. I think that's a huge compliment. That's exactly what I wanted the book to be.
Yes.
I wanted it to be no nonsense, practical, and really kind of easily applicable. I think sometimes these books can be very theoretical, and I included some theory, but most of it was just practical advice. Like, have you tried this? Like, when you go into a new school, here's some of the things that no one will ever teach you. Go and find out, how you call, who's the cover teacher, who's the Senko. How do you find, how do you put on behaviour points, like, or things like, who do you go to, and how can you ask those questions rather than waiting for, relying on, I guess, your mentor to just give you all those answers.
Yeah.
How can you go and do that research? And I think that's the other part of this book is, sometimes you might not have a mentor that's going to give you that a bit of advice because they're really focused on your subject knowledge or your specific kind of strengths and areas of development. But the book is kind of varied in that it doesn't just focus on what's happening in the classroom. It also focuses on, like, how do you improve your networking skills? Like, how do you write an application for your next job that's beyond your early career? And how do you manage your workload and well-being? And I think that's a huge part of that book that's how we help our new teachers thrive, because that's what they struggle with the most is managing workload, managing behaviour. Oh, okay, I've done all this thing, now what do I do next? And who helps me do that? And I think people are always like just looking for support, but I hope that the book tries to provide some of that support for them.
So I was going to ask you if you saw Thrive as part of a larger mission, but I think it's really obvious that you do. But what is your vision for next? How do you see that mission evolving? Do you have plans for another book?
At the moment, no. But, my publisher, I did speak to my editor, and we were talking about how that might look, maybe a larger kind of copy of that. But I think part of this work, and as you said, is to make sure that early career teachers and teachers in general stay within the profession and see themselves in the profession long term, and not just as I'm going to come, I'm going to train, then I'm going to go away and do something else. It's almost like a stepping stone. I think that is what's happening at the moment when we're looking at the data. We've got two groups of colleagues, leaving the profession, early career teachers, and we were just talking about this, weren't we, Becky, about, mums, women between the ages of 30 and 39 and working mums. And I think, this is where this work is really important. I think that if we support early career teachers, but also we help, support the leaders within the profession, that actually matches really well, because what do early career teachers need? They need mentors. They need experienced colleagues who are going to support them and say, yeah, this is just a little, it's just a glitch, or this thing that you're facing is just a short-term thing. Yeah. Whereas if we're hemorrhaging, women, for example, between those specific ages, then what we're doing is we're losing a huge group of mentors. So I think this particular book sits within that larger bit of work that I'm doing around diversity, equity, inclusion work, and really thinking about retention and recruitment with the Teaching Commission that I'm working with, and Mary Bousted and the team there is really thinking about how we're going to support early career teachers to stay within the profession. And I was saying earlier that the final line of my book is legacy. What will be your legacy? And I want new teachers to see that their legacy is within the profession, is to help those young people, generations and generations of young people, because that's what society is made up of. And if they leave, then they're leaving those young people who need them, essentially. And I think that's kind of part of that work around really ensuring that the profession is a career that's worth staying in, not just something that's a short-term goal for people because it's a backup plan. And I think that's what's happening at the moment. It's almost like a backup plan. If I can become a teacher, I can go and teach abroad, for example. I want our teachers to stay within the English education sector and help our young people in this country.
So if you could give them these ECTs one piece of advice as educators, what would you give them as your advice?
I find that always really hard. For me, I think this is the thing I wish I'd known earlier is networking, finding your internal and external networks. And I talk about this quite in detail in the book, like give like suggestions and practical bits of advice. But for me, that is essentially creating a group, a social network for yourself, both within the organization that you're working with, but also looking outside of and being outward facing and saying, who else can I look to support me? And I think that's because it's really determined the way in which my career path has gone. You know, if it hadn't been for, you know, women ed, if it hadn't been for like BAME ed and diverse ed, and even like social media platforms like X or LinkedIn, then I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now. And I think sometimes it's really easy to look at somebody like me and think, oh, it's great, she's a freelance consultant, but actually it takes a lot of effort and a lot of things like networking and building your platform to be able to get to this position. And I think that's the best bit of advice, maybe one bit of advice that I'd say is find your network, find your tribe, who are there, not just within your organisation, but beyond, and use things like social media networks to support you to find those tribes, because they're out there and there's people who are willing, and teachers and leaders who are willing to go above and beyond to support you. So yeah, have a look and always connect with us, obviously, at Chiltern Learning Trust, I would say.
Yeah, and we do offer a lot of CPD.
Exactly.
So finally, one thing about you, it can be about you as a teacher, writer, or an individual, but that people might find surprising.
I always find that really, really hard because I feel like my life is out there for everyone to see. You go on TikTok, she's there. You go on LinkedIn, she's there. What might people find surprising? I always talk about the fact that I'm neurodiverse, I'm dyslexic and dyspraxic, and I'm an English teacher. And I love telling my students that because they always find power in that. I know why, because I think sometimes when you see English teachers, you think they can't be dyslexic or they can't be dyspraxic. And I love sharing that because I think there's so much power in that I haven't overcome those things, but I found a way to live within that and my neurodiversity. I'm also been recently diagnosed as ADHD. So, I mean, if you spend an hour with me, Becky, I think it's quite obvious. I can't believe it's taken this long, but that I think is usually quite surprising for some people that, you know, somebody like me can be neurodiverse, but I think there's so much power in that, in our intersectional identities, I think.
Yeah. Wow, Yamina, thank you very much.
Thank you.